I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States of America.
I am running
for President of the United States.
I officially announce my candidacy
for President of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
Welcome, everybody, to the 6th Crystal Ball video webinar. I hope you've been enjoying this. I hope you've seen some of the prior ones. My colleague, Kyle Condick, will explain how you can see the others if you haven't. But we're going to have a good time today talking about debates. Let Kyle Condick, our managing editor of the Crystal Ball, take it away and tell you what we're going to do.
Thanks a lot, Larry. So you all will be seeing this on Thursday, September 24th. We're recording it a day early on the 23rd. So, of course, we're less than a week away from the next big event on the 2020 election calendar, which is the first of the 3 debates between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. First one is going to be next Tuesday, September 29th in Cleveland. And so we're going to devote this whole episode to the debates, both looking ahead to Trump versus Biden, but also looking back over the history of televised presidential debates, to both remember the important moments and also to look at what has mattered and maybe what hasn't. Obviously, there's a lot going on in American politics right now, particularly with the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We reacted to her passing on Monday. We made some rating changes in the race for the presidency and the race for the Senate. If you want to see what we said, please visit centerforpolitics.org/crystalball. You can also subscribe for free there. We come out at least once a week. These days, more like multiple times a week. Also, you can just Google us. Just search for the word crystal ball. You'll probably see an eBay ad for an actual crystal ball that comes up first. That's not us. Scroll down a little bit and you'll see Sabato's Crystal Ball, and you can subscribe for free there. If this is the first time you're viewing our program, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube to follow our YouTube channel, UVA CFP. And this webinar series is also available as a podcast at many different podcast services, including Apple and Spotify and many others. Just search for us there and subscribe. Additionally, we have a new 3-part documentary series on the challenges facing democracy, both in the U.S. and abroad. That's out now, called Dismantling Democracy. It's actually available nationwide for free, streaming online at the website of our partner on this documentary, VPM, Virginia Public Media. Just go to vpm.org/dismantling-democracy. Documentary series will also be available on Amazon Prime starting in October. One of the unfortunate side effects of the pandemic is that many states are still looking for poll workers. The UVA Alumni Association is encouraging young UVA alums to volunteer as poll workers. If you're interested, visit www.powerthepolls.org/UVA for more information. Centerforpolitics.org also has a lot of different information about how to serve as a poll worker, how to vote, at the vote tab at the top right-hand side of our website. Finally, if you'd like to support this broadcast and other work of the Center for Politics, just text USA Votes to 41444, USA Votes to 41444, and we appreciate those who have taken advantage of that already. And that information is also going to be in the lower third of this throughout this program. With that, let's get into it and go through the kind of a short history of U.S. Presidential debates. Larry, first of all, just in general, how much do you think these debates have mattered historically? They've been with us for more than a half century now in American presidential politics.
Yes, and in case the audience is wondering why you threw that to me, it's because I have watched in real time all of the debates starting in 1960. So that's another way of saying I'm old. But sometimes having that experience and perspective can add something to a discussion like this. Occasionally, these debates have mattered a great deal. More often, they've mattered a bit. Increasingly, they don't matter much at all. Let me just briefly mention each category there. There is simply no question, and everybody who studied it agrees with this, including the candidates, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. John F. Kennedy would never have been president had it not been for the debates, and particularly the first one. because Kennedy understood instinctively, and maybe his people as well, that this was a TV show. Yeah, it was a political TV show, but it was a TV show. Donald Trump could identify with this part. And so Kennedy prepared for it as a TV show. He looked great. He'd been tanning on the headquarters roof most of the day of his hotel. The first one was in September, late September. And he had dressed in a dark suit that really made him stand out. He looked and sounded terrific. He looked and sounded presidential. Richard Nixon, through no fault of his own, had been in the hospital. He had closed a car door on his knee. It got infected. And he was, not surprisingly, pale and wasn't responding well to some of the questions. Even his own mother called him right after the debate to see if he was okay. When your mother calls because she thinks you're sick, you know that probably you should have handled this differently. Anyway, everybody knows about the makeup problems with Nixon, and Kennedy had a professional, but that wasn't known to Nixon. The substance of the debate really wasn't important. They all said the right things, the candidates, and there wasn't a live audience for that one. So anyway, it really mattered then. Lyndon Johnson knew that he was terrible on TV, and he wasn't about to give Barry Goldwater the opportunity to shine. So there were no debates in '64. Richard Nixon had already had the debate treatment in 1960. So when he got nominated again in '68, there were no debates. And when he was running for re-election, there were no debates. And the only reason we got debates back was because the incumbent, Gerald Ford, was way behind in the election, but thought naturally, with all of his years in Washington, in Congress, and then as vice president and president, he would know the issues better than a one-term governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter. He probably did, but he made a big goof in one of the debates. We're going to cover that, and freed Poland, as it was said at the time. We'll discuss that further later. And then 1980 had a big, big impact on debates, because the famous line in the last week of the campaign from Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan looked into the camera and said to the voters, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" Well, given the economy, the answer was obviously no. And that and the disaster with the Iranian hostages, the negotiations fell apart on the Sunday prior to the Tuesday election. That was the end of Jimmy Carter. And we could go through others, and I think we will. But the point is, of late, debates don't matter very much because we, the people, are so polarized. We just tune in to cheer for our side. That's what we do. Almost nobody changes their mind. Even if a candidate has a really bad night, people say, "Oh, well, he just had a bad night. Wait till next year or next debate." And it just doesn't have any impact. Maybe these will be different. You never know what's going to happen when Donald Trump is in a debate. But if people haven't made up their minds after 5 years of Donald Trump, counting the year of the campaign, then they probably aren't going to be voting because they clearly don't pay attention.
Larry, you mentioned that there was this big break between 1960 and 1976, 16 years without televised debates, and then we've had them every cycle since 1976, so going on 4 decades. I think there's usually chatter every election about, oh, well, will there be debates? How many debates will there be? Usually there are 3 and 1 vice presidential debate, and even some folks like Nancy Pelosi have suggested Joe Biden shouldn't have even agreed to do the debates. Because they think that Trump just isn't gonna tell the truth at all. We have a question from a reader, Tom Rockwell, from Richmond, about Biden. He says, "I feel like his campaign and possibly his debate strategy is basically a don't put your foot in your mouth policy. Biden's low profile and being out of sight except for a soundbite has me worried on how he will stand up to the full assault likely to come from Trump." What do you think about that, Larry?
Well, it's possible it's going to work out that way. But, Biden is a better debater than he's given credit for. People only remember the last debate. And his last debate was with Bernie Sanders. And prior to that, debate with other Democrats. And Biden isn't as good when he is debating fellow partisans. And he was the front runner and ended up with the nomination. He didn't want to divide the party, so he wasn't as harsh as some of the other candidates were toward him. Oddly, Kamala Harris is the VP candidate, and she probably zinged him harder than anybody else during the Democratic debates. But for those who think Biden isn't a good debater, please go back to 2012 and watch his debate with Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan, younger, very good on his feet, very articulate. I think most people agree that Joe Biden won that debate. That included a lot of Republicans. Go back and see it again. It's on YouTube and other places. You may have a different opinion. Now, yes, Biden is older. So is Donald Trump. They're both older. But I don't know that he's going to be that bad. I do think he has to go in with a message and deliver it. It can't just be anger at the things that Trump is saying. Trump is going to try and provoke him. It isn't hard, given the things that Trump says to anybody. But that's not the way to conduct a debate. But I would not be so critical, at least starting out, about Biden's debate performances, because that is not the Joe Biden I've seen in debates against a Republican, not against fellow Democrats, against a Republican.
So let's get back into the history here a little bit. And so we mentioned that, we had these in 1960, then we go 16 years and we get to 1976 with Ford and Carter. We've got a series of, I guess, famous debate moments we're going to show some clips of and react to. So the first one we're going to show is, Larry alluded to it, was Gerald Ford's gaffe against Jimmy Carter about Poland and Eastern Europe. And just before we play this clip, I want to acknowledge our great Crystal Ball Center for Politics intern, Chris Obolensky, who assembled all these clips for us. So let's play the Ford-Carter clip from 1976.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Now, Larry, of course, this was at the height of the Cold War. The Iron Curtain was all across Eastern Europe, and Ford looked pretty foolish for this, right?
Well, he did at the time. Of course, when the Soviet Union fell apart and all the satellites became independent, Ford wrote an op-ed, I think, for the New York Times that said, "I told you so." But look, well, obviously what Ford was trying to say is, my administration and the United States, the people, are not going to recognize Soviet domination of these independent countries because they had their own views separate from the Soviets. But it came across as Ford apparently not understanding a fundamental of European and Soviet-U.S. relations, which is that those countries were, for all practical purposes, pure satellites of the Soviet Union. The problem was Ford dug his heels in, as politicians often do when they're challenged. And they know what they meant to say, and they keep repeating it. And they, the old line is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Well, Ford kept digging. It actually mattered because Ford was moving up. Ford started, there was a poll that had him 33 points behind Jimmy Carter in the summer. I don't really believe that, but he started a good, 15 to 20 points behind Carter, but he was gaining a half a point almost daily. I went to the Gerald Ford Library a couple of decades ago, not long after it was established in Grand Rapids. And I would encourage all of you to visit as many presidential libraries as you can. And I looked up a recently released file from the pollster, Bob Teeter, who was Ford's pollster during that campaign. And I was just amazed because they were doing tracking. And Ford was moving up, and he would have overtaken Carter by election day, except for this debate. Ford didn't drop much, but he flatlined. And losing that time, losing the gains he was making, cost him the election. So there's a classic case like 1960 where a debate actually did matter. It took Ford days to clear up the mess. And finally, he was convinced he had to explain what he had said and why he had said it.
That election did, of course, end up being very close. And two of the states that were really crucial that year were Wisconsin and Ohio, both of which have substantial populations, particularly back then, of people who might identify with, their ancestors back in Eastern Europe, people of Polish and Hungarian descent, etc. And there is some belief that comment may have really actually hurt Ford in those states. And again, they were decided by such small margins that, you just never know if that might have actually been really, really important. So like 1960, I think we could say that 76 may have mattered in what was another really close election. Let's move ahead to 1980, and we're going to play that clip from Ronald Reagan in that election. And 1980 was a pretty bad year in American life, as I think it's fair to say 2020 has been. And Reagan sort of put the choice to the voters about whether they wanted 4 more years of what they had already experienced. So let's play that clip.
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. We'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have.
This is such a great articulation of a referendum kind of argument against an incumbent president, because Reagan just very much sums it up. It's an up or down vote on Carter. He doesn't say Carter's name specifically, but that's what it is. I kind of wonder if we might hear something similar from Biden in these debates. What do you think, Larry?
Well, we ought to. If Biden's on top of his game, he ought to be use that very line or something similar, and maybe say it more than once. You have to do that nowadays, because while your partisans will watch the entire debate, maybe twice, because that's the way they are, including the people watching this video, no doubt, a lot of Americans are going to tune in for 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and they're going to get a sampling of it, but they're not going to watch the whole debate. So he ought to say that. It makes perfect sense. He can draw in the pandemic. He can draw in the economy. He can draw in racial inequity and what's been going on as a consequence. Loads of things he can draw in, and maybe even throw in the Supreme Court seat, although Biden's been hesitant to really make that an issue, and one can understand why. So we'll see. You never know whether a candidate is on his game or not until he or she gets there and actually starts performing. And yes, it's a performance. There's nothing wrong with that. It's television. It's just what John F. Kennedy understood in 1960, and Richard Nixon didn't.
Reagan, of course, is a former actor and is known as one of the really great orators, and it's had many, many memorable moments in his political career. And so we've got another clip from Reagan from the 1984 debates with Walter Mondale. There were 2 debates in 1984. Reagan was leading Mondale that whole race. I don't know if there's a whole lot of drama there, but there was definitely a feeling that Reagan kind of bombed the first debate and that he had really shown his age. And it sort of set up a dynamic that we've seen in other election years, where sometimes an incumbent president will do poorly in the first debate. I guess more recently, Barack Obama in 2012 is a great example of that. We'll get to that. But so this kind of Reagan's poor performance in showing his age in the first debate led to a memorable moment at the second debate in 1984 with Mondale, which we can play that clip now.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Of course, even Mondale cracked up at that one. And certainly a great example of how humor could be deployed to great effect in a debate setting. You know, this does remind me too. I mean, we do have these two older candidates, both of whom I think are sometimes criticized for or pointed out that their public comments are sometimes not quite up to snuff. You know, and the president has not, you know, there's been reports that he hasn't really been preparing all that much for the debates. Biden has to some extent. You know, do you think there's a danger, Larry, that Trump could maybe fall into some of the same traps that incumbent presidents sometimes fall into in these first debates?
Well, again, it's possible, but Trump is the most unusual of all modern presidents, maybe presidents, period. So I'm not sure. You know, sometimes when you over-prepare a candidate, which is what happened in Reagan's first debate with Mondale, he was over-prepared. His aides said it, Reagan said it. They had been filling him with facts and numbers and things that we know today don't matter at all. Facts, what's that? A number? You know, get that out of there. And so Reagan had a much more relaxed schedule leading into that next debate. Now, yes, they obviously prepared the line about, I won't take age and inexperience of my opponent and use it partisanly. But by and large, this was a matter of Reagan being Reagan. And Trump is far more that way, even than Reagan was. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see whether it really matters or not. With Trump, Trump knows what he wants to say. Now, his problem is going to be that if Biden can provoke him just enough, the most unattractive side of Donald Trump will be put on display. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. Very unattractive. I think you've got a clip about that eventually, but we'll get to that.
We certainly do. 1984 was actually the first year where you had the vice presidential debates. And that brings us to the next clip in 1988, which was the VP debate between Dan Quayle and Lloyd Bentsen. And I think certainly the most famous moment that ever came out of one of these vice presidential debates. So let's play that one.
It is not just age, it's accomplishments, it's experience. I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of vice president of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
You know, Benson's face just kind of like lights up when Quayle mentions Kennedy. You could just sort of see the wheels turning in his head.
Well, they prepared it because Quayle had been using that line in some form or another in most of his stump speeches. That's why candidates have trackers on their opponents. They like to get all the information that the other candidate, the opponent is using so that they can turn it against the candidate in a debate like this. So they prepared that. Benson knew exactly what he wanted to say if Quayle mentioned John F. Kennedy. And you know, you can't blame Quayle for using it as a factual matter. He was correct. But of course, that was part of the era when the image of John F. Kennedy was saintly. And the horrible assassination had elevated him in a way that just didn't apply to other presidents. So Dan Quayle did not look or act like John F. Kennedy, and he seemed like a deer in the headlights even there. So it was a great line, but it also proved something else. You could have great line after great line after great line. You could make debate history, as Benson did with the John F. Kennedy line against Quayle. And the Dukakis-Benson ticket lost overwhelmingly. So, you know, you can win a debate and lose the election. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's happened more than once.
do you think the VP debate has ever been very impactful? I guess the one I think about was, I think eventually Sarah Palin became kind of a liability for John McCain in 2008 after she got off to, I think, a pretty strong start. Maybe the debate played a role in that, but I don't know if that really changed much of anything. Did any standout for you, Larry?
Yeah, the standout was that Obama and Biden knew they were well ahead. Things looked good. They were at the point where they didn't want to rock the boat too much. So Biden was not patronizing, but he was very polite to Governor Palin in that debate. Go back and watch it. And there really weren't that many sparks. And that's what they wanted. They wanted the debate to have one day's worth of headlines, maybe two, and then recede into the background. And that's normally what happens with vice presidential debates.
We've got another clip from the 1988 election that we wanted to play, and this was from the final debate between Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush, and it was the first question that Dukakis got at that debate. So let's play that one.
The first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America.
That has to be one of the toughest moderator questions ever in a debate, right?
Well, look, Bernie Shaw is tough. I miss him on CNN. He was a Marine, and he went right to the core of things. I never detected in Bernie any bias. He'd ask equally tough questions of all of the candidates when he was a debate moderator. Anyway, I can understand why Mike Dukakis answered it the way he did. He was stunned by it. He said later it was just out of left field for him. And obviously, in retrospect, you would want to answer that in a human way. You'd want to say, look, my impulse would be to get that guy in a dark room and take care of him myself. We wouldn't have to use electricity on him. Just say something like that people could identify with before you say why, in principle, you're opposed to the death penalty. But it was such a bloodless answer. I think the election was over well before that debate, and George H.W. Bush was going to win handily, which he did. But if there was any doubt, I think we pretty much closed the book on that election the night of that debate. And that's why. That answer is why, and it's what all candidates fear, that they will give an answer that may make sense to them at the moment. Maybe they've frozen for some reason, and it will be the end of their candidacy.
This leads to another question from Loretta McCabe, simply who chooses the moderators. And so it's the Commission on Presidential Debates. And they basically run the show of these debates. They're sometimes one or the other candidates will sometimes want to do something outside of the commission structure, but they've controlled this for a long time and continue to. There are some folks who moderated debates for many decades. This time we've got Chris Wallace from Fox, who's doing the first one, Susan Page from USA Today, who's doing the vice presidential debate, Steve Scully from C-SPAN, who's going to do the second debate, which is the town hall format, which we'll get to, and Kirsten Welker of NBC is going to do the final debate. And speaking of the town hall format, so that was a new innovation in 1992. A questioner at this kind of forum kind of tripped up George H.W. Bush, who you could see at the start of this clip looking at his watch, and then there's kind of a famous exchange here. So let's take a look at that.
We have a question right here.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally.
On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong. Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
What I'm saying
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question, and I'll try to answer it.
Larry, you were in the building for this, right? For this debate?
I was right behind one of the pillars in that room. Good friend of mine, Tom Morris, for the University of Richmond, which did a terrific job putting on that debate back in 1992. And look, again, one doesn't want to be too critical, certainly, of President Bush. He probably almost certainly would have lost the election regardless of that debate. But I learned one thing, which is don't go to a debate personally and be in the room, because you'll miss some key moments available only to a television audience. I didn't notice. I was watching carefully, but I didn't notice Bush look at his watch. And that was one of the key moments of all the debates we've been discussing, because I think people interpreted that as, oh, God, I can't wait till this is over. And probably that's exactly what George H.W. Bush was thinking. And then what you didn't show there, because we don't have time, is Clinton taking that question and in classic I feel your pain fashion, stepping right up almost to the platform there and addressing the woman and her question in terms of the economy and how bad it is and how much it's hurting average people, and that he's felt it too. And he just aced the exam, as Clinton usually did in situations like that. And of course, Ross Perot was there too. Bush had two opponents. I don't think Perot cared one way or another about Bill Clinton. He just wanted to see Bush lose. And so Bush was in a terrible position, and it was the first town hall format. And that was not Bush's format. That was designed for Bill Clinton. And sure enough, it worked like a charm.
Let's move ahead to 2000 and another kind of famous clip from the town hall debate where the candidates, I guess, have a little more freedom of movement, which we saw with Al Gore and George W. Bush in 2000. So let's play that clip.
I specifically would like to know whether Governor Bush will support the Dingell-Norwood bill, which is the main one pending.
Governor Bush, you may answer that if you'd like, but also I'd like to know how you see the differences between the two of you, and we need to move on.
Well, the difference is that I can get it done, that I can get something positive done on behalf of the people. That's what the question in this campaign is about. It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can.
That little nod from Bush makes me laugh.
Classic. Well, it's also human. I mean,
right.
It was just weird. There's not another word for it. It was just weird. Undoubtedly, Gore was trying to intimidate Bush as he was giving his answer, and he wanted to cut right into it at some point, but it wasn't very human. That's not the way that people approach one another, even in a debate. Now, in today's terms, that was hardly offensive, but it's one of the things people remembered about that debate. And for those who do remember the debate at all today, it's one of the things that people will cite. What was that all about? Gore invading Bush's space. So you have to be careful, even with your gestures, maybe especially with your gestures.
This all reminds me too, Larry, you did a great segment somewhat recently with Michael Smerconish on CNN talking about the quote, the most important election of people's lifetimes. And you had talked about a lot, that first of all, not every single one can obviously be the most important, even though that comes out every year. But also that, like 1980, really important election. And just, I think about for my own lifetime, I was born in 1983. I might look back now and say 2000 was maybe the most important election. And we think about that election as being not that important, but just a lot of the things that stem from 2000, an election that was really close, turnout wasn't that great. And yet, it just wasn't seen as much of a choice between Bush and Gore. I think it actually probably was, just as a little aside there.
And who knew about 9/11 coming and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Katrina, and then the economic collapse. But that's the point. You never know what's coming. So you're trying to pick an individual who is best prepared to deal with unknown crises. That's the picture that people should be focusing on. And unfortunately, they rarely do. You know, they'll end up saying, I don't like the way he answered that question. I can't stand this guy. Most of it today is just party identification, but we tend to focus on little things that really don't mean very much, nor does it even matter that much whether a president is a better debater than the opponent, because that's not really what the job is about. It's a piece of the job, but there are lots of pieces to it, mainly judgment and character. Those are the things that matter more than anything else, plus ideology that comes from the party ID of each candidate.
Speaking of just the town hall format and the candidates kind of moving around, we have a question from Chris Nichols. Should there be any consideration being made to moderate behavior during the debate? I remember Trump swirling around like a circling shark during his second debate with Mrs. Clinton, and it was both disruptive and painful to watch. And the question obviously reminds me too of the Gore Bush clip we just showed.
Yeah, well, he got away with it, didn't he? He won, and that in the end is the ultimate evaluation of various techniques. But did I think it was strange and rude? Of course I did, just as I thought Gore had been rude in that particular incident. But what Gore did was minor compared to the things that Trump said and did during the campaign, and for that matter, his presidency. I guess in that sense, the Trump we saw in the debate is the Trump who has been president for nearly 4 years.
Yeah, that's fair to say. You know, we didn't really think there were any specifically memorable clips from 2004, 2008, and 2012. That said, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier, Barack Obama really did kind of bomb in the first debate against Mitt Romney in 2012, and actually the numbers moved a little bit, and it seemed like Obama might have actually like kicked away the election. Although researchers sort of discovered later on that basically the president's supporters were just so disheartened by his performance that they weren't answering polls and whatnot, and so the movement was a little temporary. Larry, what do you remember about that 2012 debate with Obama and Romney?
I remember watching it and thinking to myself, did President Obama come to this debate? Where is he? Where is the Barack Obama we've known for 4 or 5 years? I don't know what the problem really was. Maybe it was that he knew he had an edge over Romney and he didn't want to make any mistakes, and so he stuck to the memorized lines, but it was not an impressive performance in any way, shape, or form. And if you go back to the Twitter of that day, you'll see that it was his supporters who really were the most disheartened. And almost everyone said, where's my candidate? Where's the Barack Obama that I know and supported in 2008? But you know what? There's always another day. There's always another battle. There's always another debate. Even after the last debate, there are things you can do to change people's minds. And so, again, we put too much emphasis on what happens each day, even a debate day. It's always the most important thing that has ever happened or ever will happen until the next day when something even more important happens. So, you know, I've gotten out of that routine, and I try to prod others not to make broad statements like that because they're not true.
We had one more clip we wanted to play, and that was from the 2016 Trump and Hillary Clinton debates.
That's part of my commitment to raise taxes on the wealthy. My Social Security payroll contribution will go up, as will Donald's, assuming he can't figure out how to get out of it. But what we want to do is to replenish the Social Security Trust Fund by making sure that we have sufficient resources.
And, you know, those debates were, I think, pretty tense. And interestingly, you know, there are these snap polls that come out after all the debates, asking people who they thought won. And Clinton was generally judged to be the winner by viewers in the 3 debates, and yet she still ended up, you know, losing the Electoral College. Like, what do you remember from the debates in 2016?
Well, we knew by the fall of 2016, and we know it extremely well today, that absolutely nothing that is said or done by Donald Trump will affect his support from the vast majority of those who follow him, who are in his base. And it's a very big base. It's 40 to 44, somewhere in that vicinity, and just doesn't matter what happens. And that was a good example. To most people, it was rude, it was sexist, and it made no difference. It may even have helped him, because Hillary Clinton's problem in the end wasn't just Jim Comey reopening an investigation about emails or whatever. What was that about? Anyway, it wasn't just that. It was Hillary Clinton's personality. And even if people agreed with her on some things and thought she was more intelligent and able than Donald Trump, they didn't like her and they didn't trust her. And so you can, and I'm not saying that's a fair evaluation of her. I'm simply saying that was at the core of why Hillary Clinton lost a race she never should have lost. So to me, that little clip summarized Clinton's basic problem and cut through everything Clinton was saying. It was all factual, and she was pointing out, the fine points of her tax policy versus Trump. Do you think anybody remembers any of that? No, they remembered Donald Trump looking right into the camera and saying, "What a nasty woman." And for the people who hated Hillary Clinton or didn't like her, but maybe were thinking about voting for her, bingo, that was a moment that helped shape their view, leading to the big upset.
The last debate in 2016 was almost 3 weeks before Election Day. And so there was a lot of time after the debates for other things to come into the picture. And I think that's what happened in some ways with the Comey letter and other things that Larry mentioned. This time the gap is smaller, just a little under 2 weeks between the last debate on October 22nd and the election. Do you think it's possible, Larry, that the debates matter more this time, just because the time of the election is shorter? Although, of course, a lot of people are voting early now too.
Yeah, I think the debates will be irrelevant for millions and millions, simply because they will already have cast a vote. People are lining up, as we've seen, in the thousands to cast a vote. At the very first instant, the polls are open and the early voting sites are open, or you can get an absentee ballot. So maybe they matter even less, but you're right, there's less time. And of course, if we find out that the last debate really did have a major impact, this is exactly what we'll say. Well, it was so close to the election. But in the Trump era, time is elongated. Every day seems like 2 or 3. And so it may be a shorter period of time as we used to measure time, but time has been stretched. And as a consequence, I just doubt that anything that happens in that final debate, unless somebody falls all over themselves or falls down dead drunk, maybe that'll have an impact. But other than something that dramatic, I think we'll move on very quickly to the final arguments, which will be made by the ads and the candidates in their stump speeches. And then the remaining people will vote. And we'll have a result certainly by Christmas. I'm going to be very definitive there. I think we will know the next president by Christmas.
We hope so anyway. So this was our kind of tour through the debate history. Of course, the debates will be starting next week, and I'm sure we'll be reacting to it here and reacting to it in our Crystal Ball newsletter. So thanks for tuning in. Remember, if you want to support this program, support the work of the Center for Politics, just text 414 or text USA Votes to 41444. USA Votes to 41444. And thank you for tuning in.